Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Gladstone. In this video today, we are going to read an article from Junior Scholastic on Navajo Code Talkers. So here in this picture, it shows code talkers worked in teams of two, one to handle the radio and the other to do the coding. The code that couldn't be broken. During World War II, a group of young Navajo men created an unbreakable code that helped the United States defeat Japan and win the war in the Pacific. This was written on January 29th, 2018 by Brian Brown. And on the right side, you can see a picture of Sam Sandoval at age 19 in 1942 on the left. Now, remember, this article was written in 2018, so it says that this is a picture of him today, but unfortunately, he passed away on July 29th, 2022 at the age of 98. Okay, so when reading an article, it's really important to look at not only the author who wrote it, but when the article was written. So that way you are up to date on current events. So let's start. For 12 years, Sam Sandoval was forbidden to speak his own language. Like many generations of Navajo, he was sent away from his home in New Mexico to a boarding school as a child. He was forced to give up much of his native culture and speak only in English. Sandoval and his friends used to sneak away and talk Navajo, he says. Then, on December 7th, 1941, Japanese planes attacked the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The attack killed more than 2,400 Americans. It sent the U.S. into World War II from 1939 to 1945 against Japan and its allies. After Pearl Harbor, Sandoval, like millions of other Americans, signed up to defend his country. He joined the Marines at 19. But he would not be an ordinary soldier. To his surprise, the Marines picked him for an experiment. They asked him to help create and use a secret code. It would be based on the Navajo language. Sandoval would become part of a celebrated group of about 400 Navajos known as the Code Talkers. Their unbroken code helped the U.S. win key battles in the Pacific Ocean, see map below, and win the war against Japan. Okay, and this is just a video of a code talker telling his story, and we can view that another time in a different video. Notice this subheading, or this header of this paragraph, a complex language. The U.S. faced huge problems when it entered World War II in December 1941. The Pearl Harbor attack had badly damaged the Navy's fleet of ships in the Pacific Ocean. By the spring of 1942, the powerful Japanese military controlled much of the Pacific. It was threatening Australia, an American ally, and it was moving closer to the U.S. itself. For the U.S. and its allies, winning the Pacific would be a huge job. Communication was one of the biggest challenges. To send battle plans and control troop movements over thousands of miles of ocean, Marines had to talk by radio. They did that in code so the enemy could not understand. But the Japanese were experts at deciphering codes. They seemed to predict the Americans' every move. Navajos were asked to use the once forbidden language to defend the U.S. In Los Angeles, California, a man named Philip Johnson thought of a solution. He was the son of Christian missionaries who had worked with the Navajo. He had grown up on the tribe's reservation, a huge 27,000 square mile area in New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah. Johnson knew how complex the Navajo language was. There was no written version, and few non-natives could understand it. Johnson contacted Marine officers with the idea of developing a code based on Navajo. Here's a group of code talkers in the jungle of Bougainville in December 1943. The fight for the island lasted until August 1945. Devising the code. To most Navajos, that idea would have seemed odd and unexpected. Beginning in the 1860s, the U.S. government had spent years forcing Navajo children to attend boarding schools. Those schools were designed to replace their native ways and language with more American ones. Later, many Navajo parents chose to send their kids to those schools because they were better than the schools on the reservation. Now Navajos were being asked to use their once forbidden language to help protect the U.S. in early 1942. The Marines started a project at Camp Pendleton near San Diego, California. 29 young Navajo men took part. They were given 211 common terms used in battle. For each, they created a code word with a unique Navajo spin. See Code of Battle below. For example, they called fighter planes hummingbirds. That was because fighter planes were smaller and lighter than bombers. Next, the coders increased their word list. They spelled out English words and placed names using a code based on Navajo words. For example, they would replace the English letter A with the Navajo for ant, wolachi. In all, their vocabulary would number more than 800 terms. The Navajos memorized the entire list. That made them incredibly fast in sending messages. In field tests, they could send a 4-line message in 20 seconds. A standard coding machine took 30 minutes. Best of all, no one except the code talkers could understand the messages, not even other Navajos. Military officials were impressed, but would the code work on the battlefield? Code of Battle. In devising their code, the Navajos used descriptive phrases in their own language as substitutes for common battle terms and other words in English. For example, the code for artillery was Bial do Solani, Navajo for many big guns. Here are some other examples. We have military terms, Navajo code words translated into English, and the pronunciation of the Navajo word. So let's look at the military term fighter plane. The Navajo code word for hummingbird in Navajo would be dahi-tihi-hi. The military term for battleship, the Navajo code word is whale, and the pronunciation of the Navajo word would be lotso. The military term submarine, the Navajo code word for that would be iron fish, and the pronunciation of Navajo is beshlo. The military term for bomb, well, the Navajo code word was eggs, and the pronunciation of the Navajo word was ayeshi. And last but not least, our military term for grenade, the Navajo code word that they had for grenade was potatoes, and the pronunciation of the Navajo word is imasi. A trial by fire. They soon found out. In July 1942, the Japanese invaded Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. That gave them an air base even closer to Australia. That worried U.S. military officials who organized a hurried invasion of the island. On August 7th, the first wave of Marines stormed the beach. It would be a 6-month struggle. In November, the code talkers joined them. The fighting was brutal. Marines trudged through thick jungle. They faced death at every step. Dense jungle tree lines made it hard for U.S. pilots to see where to drop bombs on the enemy or supplies for U.S. troops. The code talkers and their radios were often the only lifeline the Marines had to medicine, ammunition, food, and each other. Chester Nez was one of the original 29 code talkers. In later years, he wrote about working nonstop for 24 hours at a time, crammed into a foxhole. He described his first radio transmission when he called in an attack on a Japanese machine gun that had his patrol pinned down. A runner approached, handing me a message written in English. I sent the message to another code talker. Enemy machine gun nest on your right flank. Destroy. Suddenly, just after my message was received, the Japanese gun exploded, destroyed by U.S. artillery. Working so quickly with a code the enemy could not crack made the Navajos a powerful new weapon. The Japanese finally retreated from Guadalcanal in February 1943. By then, the code talkers had proved themselves. taking Iwo Jima. But the fighting was far from over. The war in the Pacific became a harsh series of battles to control islands that could lead to a possible U.S. invasion of Japan. Sam Sandoval went through training in 1942. Soon he was in the thick of it, as he would say. He would see action at Guadalcanal, Bougainville, Peleliu, Guam, and Okinawa. Those were some of the most terrifying battles of the war. In each battle, the code talkers were essential. One of the bloodiest fights was over the island of Iwo Jima. It began in February 1945. It took the Marines a month to take the island. The battle claimed the lives of some 6,800 Americans and 22,000 Japanese. The entire operation was directed by Navajo Code, Signal Officer Major Howard Connor later said. They sent and received over 800 messages without an error. Were it not for the Navajo Code talkers, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. Celebrating the Code talkers. The war dragged on until August 1945. It ended when the U.S. dropped 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Sandoval still remembers the greatest message he ever decoded on August 14th. The imperial forces of Japan have surrendered. Soon the code talkers would begin coming home, but they did not benefit from the post-war economic boom like the rest of the U.S. Instead, the Navajos headed back to their reservation. There, jobs and opportunity were scarce. To make matters worse, the code talkers could not talk about what they had done. The U.S. government had declared their operation top secret. The Navajo Code was kept secret until 1968. What the code talkers did truly represents who we are as Americans. Today, more than 75 years after their first mission in 1942, the Navajos are recognized as national heroes. Last November, President Donald Trump honored them in a ceremony at the White House. Code talker Peter McDonald is now 90 years old. He said that their act of patriotism crossed all boundaries of language and culture. What we did, he said, truly represents who we are as Americans. Sandoval is also proud of his service to the country, of being a Navajo, and of his unique part in using a military code that was never cracked by the enemy. Many have tried throughout the world to break that code, he says. No one can. Here's a core question for you. Why might Navajos have found the idea of using their language as a code during World War II to be ironic? Okay, and here's a map of the war in the Pacific from 1941 to 1945.